Since starting TrainerRoad in February, my FTP has gone from 243 to 324. Holy cow. And he mentions that that
Awesome.
is as of September. Way to go. That's great.
Yeah.
It says I'm getting closer to my long-term goal of 5 watts per kilogram and now sit at 4.6. My weight is 70.5 kilograms. So I ride 4 days a week for a total of 7 to 10 hours of pedaling on average. So that's usually like what we see for a high volume rider. If you're following a high volume plan, that's like what you would need in terms of structured time following a TrainerRoad plan. It says I'm not currently following a plan, but with a history in gravity racing, decided to stick to base and build phase for this year. And it's also worth saying that isn't currently following a plan just because he finished his plan progression. He was following a plan all the way up to this. I happen to know who Derek is, so so he followed a plan to get to where he is. He just right now currently isn't.
He's in between plans.
There we go. I like it. Way to go, Chad. He says, I also strength train 2 times a week, which I believe has been a huge reason for progress without excessive volume. And this is true. This is his job. It's Derek Teal at Dialed Health on Instagram. He's a strength trainer specifically for cyclists. So it's his job to do strength training and to help people with this. And he does in-person training too. So when he mentions 2 times a week, I think he's probably actually doing a little bit more, whether it's for filming new video segments or anything else like that. He's doing a lot, but the dude's jacked and he happens to have an allergy to wearing a shirt too. If you go on Instagram, you can see that. I don't blame him. I'd probably do the same thing if I looked like him. So he says, another detail, I haven't missed a workout all year. Not one. I literally mean that. So my question is, do you think it's possible to reach my goal without an increase in volume? So he asked this question here, and this is the thing that a lot of us bump up against, right? Where we hit a plateau. So we think, oh, the answer is more. Like if I do more, then I'll be able to do that. And here's another like bit of information on Derek. Derek has, I believe, a 1-year-old little boy, and he has twins coming along the way. So Derek doesn't exactly have the luxury of time running his own business and doing all of that. So if you're listening to this, this is probably pretty relatable to a lot of us here with a lot of responsibilities on our plate. So just adding more probably isn't a feasible option for Derek either, because his time is going to get really crazy once he has 2 little ones in addition to the current one. Okay, with all of that, here's the perspective that I have on this. I'm going to rephrase what Derek said in another way. Okay. He's saying, I've been doing everything perfectly and seeing huge gains. For that to continue, should I change absolutely everything about what I'm doing? I know that sounds silly, but how many times have all of us done that, right? Where we're like, everything is working, we're doing great, we're seeing improvements. And then we see like one small thing that we say like, okay, I must have plateaued, throw out everything I've done. Let's restart and reassess. When really the chances are it's probably like, maybe have you even plateaued? It's probably a good thing to question, right, Chad?
Yeah. So as a coach, that'd be the first thing I'd ask him. As an athlete, that's the first thing you need to ask yourself. I mean, have you even plateaued? If you haven't, if you're still on the ascendancy, well, why would you change anything? I mean, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it. And I understand. I understand the compulsion. I'm going really well. I want to keep on going really well. This is going to run out at some point. I need to fix this now, but don't fix it until it's evident that something isn't working anymore. First off, maximize anything that's working for you, as long as that makes sense. I mean, if it's even reasonably in line with your goals, if it's working, keep on doing it. Like for example, block periodization, it's seldom necessary. At times it is necessary. In most cases, and Derek, this probably still applies to you, blended training is effective. And yeah, you're dabbling in so many different energy systems, and it seems like, how can I keep elevating all of them? But you've made it clear that you're not going backwards yet. You haven't even leveled off. So it still makes sense. Keep on doing it. And then just look at, I mean, if everything that you need to have be reliable in race scenarios or whatever your events are, those are your relevant energy systems. And if you're touching on them, they're at least being maintained. And then, focus on the ones that are more important, but don't feel the need to place added emphasis unnecessarily or prematurely. Just it's so easy to overthink this.
So it's more about getting more out of what you're currently doing, right? Like what you're doing right now. First of all, if you continue to do that, you'll probably still see improvement. But this is an interesting topic for all of us, how to get more out of what we're doing currently and what we can do, right, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, Nate's a good example of sweet spot being effective. So it was working for him, so he kept doing it, and it kept working for him, so he kept doing it. I mean, I don't even know, Nate, you tell us, did you have to change your volume substantially, or did you just start doing longer intervals? I mean, what did you change to keep you on that upward trend?
Just high volume. Yeah. And actually, I don't know. I overtrained and stuff too. I did the opposite. I wanted more gains faster. So I did too much. And then I kind of fell off a cliff, and I fell into the trap that you said not to. I think I would have been faster at this moment if I would just be consistent year round and keep increasing.
Very probably. So he had something that was working for him, and he maintained it to some extent, but to some extent he also changed it. And that's where things started to break down.
Yeah. I think that like for a lot of us, we can probably look at low hanging fruit. I know Derek is very disciplined in his nutrition. I know that his sleep is probably where he has like a big opportunity for improvement. When you have a young child, it's really tough, like, because you don't get to choose your sleep schedule in many cases. That gets interrupted and it's really dictated by something else, especially with twins on the way. I don't know how he will sleep. So, but at the same time, that's like one spot. So finding low hanging fruit, Chad, is probably like a good way to look at things if you want to really increase that ramp rate.
Yeah, and also more when whatever was working for you stops working for you. That's when you start to think just a little outside of that box. And you don't have to go as far as lab testing. I mean, there's no reason why not, if you can afford it and you want to spend the time doing that. But you probably know what's holding you back. Am I really weak when I have to work above threshold for a couple minutes at a time? Am I really weak when I have to work just slightly below threshold for many minutes at a time? So you can shift your emphases based on what you know is maybe something you struggle with, and you recognize that struggling with that actually affects your performance negatively. And when it comes to these forms, at least what I consider to be these forms of low hanging fruit, strength training is probably the first thing. And we're very clear that Derek has that box checked. The long ride, I'm guessing he's doing it, but considering he's a parent and he's got another couple of youngsters on the way, that long ride is probably going to be a taller and taller order. We'll see. Intensity, if he's following our training plans, then yeah, he's probably checking that box as well. And then longer intervals. So this is probably the easiest fix, or not fix, but change when things start to stall a bit, is take the same intervals you're already doing, the same durations of the workouts you're already doing, and just figure out how to change the composition within those confines. You know, your 2-minute VO2 max intervals become 2.5s. Your 10-minute sweet spot efforts become 12s or 15s or even 20s, that sort of thing. And then form work. This is underrated too frequently, is people don't recognize how biomechanically inefficient they are, how they lack coordination. And we did touch on this last week when we talked about strength training and how strength training benefits coordination, but coordination benefits coordination. You can do it via speed work. You can do it via simple repetition. You can do it simply by focusing on what you're doing, saying, am I riding my bike well right now? I'm doing the same sweet spot workout I've done 4 other times, but this time I'm really going to focus on trying to make it feel easier by pedaling a little more smoothly.
I want to debunk another thing that we bump up against a lot of the time. Whether you cracked the nut to get to 3 watts per kilogram or 4 watts per kilogram, whatever it is, a lot of the time we think, well, yeah, my training has gotten me sub 3, but once I get to 3, I got to train totally differently, right? And we think that like we're stuck at 4.8 watts per kilogram forever, asking for a friend, of course, and stuck at 4.8, and we can't get to 5. When I get to 5, I've got to train totally differently. Your body has no clue. Like it doesn't know
where
the
those
difference
delineations
between 4.8. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it doesn't care when you're at 5 versus 4.8. But we're really good at drawing those delineations, because we see data and we see benchmarks and we see landmarks that we're reaching for. So when we reach those, a lot of the time it's tempting to think that everything will be different. But more often than not, the answer is just sticking with structure. And when you drift from structure, that's when things do have to change. But many times if you just stick with structure, kind of like what you were saying, Nate, like if you had been more consistent, right, you might be ahead of where you are right now.
It's water cutting stone, as a great mind once said on this podcast. What people don't realize too is, okay, you go from 300 to 310 to 320, and you keep the same hours and the same TSS. That is relative to your FTP. So you're actually doing more kilojoules and having more stress on your body. That is a stepped increase in stress. So when you say, oh, I need more volume, you are doing more kilojoules. That's more volume, right?
More work,
during that
yeah.
time. And you don't necessarily have to extend the duration. You are raising the amount of watts you're doing. And like you can get I think there is a maximum amount of hours that you can take as a normal person, and it might be around 10. Like I'm getting more and more to the thought of when I push myself over 10 hours, things like something falls apart. Like either TrainerRoad drops off, my family drops off, or my cycling fitness drops off. But if I am more consistent over the whole year, I'll be farther ahead. And I want to say something else about Derek. So I'm on his Instagram. Dude is chiseled. His pecs have like shadows. Like I don't have that. That's pretty good. He's not hugely jacked like a CrossFit person, but Derek, you got some. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but your upper body weight, if you lost upper body mass, like smaller pecs and smaller arms, that's probably not helping you push the pedals at all. I don't think it's a limiter based on what you look like. You could probably lose weight and hit your 5 watt per kilo or be very, very close to it. And still maintain your leg muscle and all that sort of stuff. But because of his job, that's probably not an option. They don't want him to look like a Chris Froome, right? Upper body.
You could look just like
T-Rex.
a cyclist, Eric. Isn't that appealing?
Yeah. But that would be a very...
You're going to want to leave your shirt on after that,
though. Yeah. But I mean, that is an option for a lot of people. And when I am strong, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm 6'6", and if I have a whole bunch of upper body mass, it's easy to gain an extra 10, 20 pounds. And then it's really hard. You got to be really, really strong to be able to hit 5 watts per kilo and have muscle like upper body mass at the same time. That is actually, do you guys know anybody who's like that? Who's kind of jacked upper body? I can only think of rowers. Rowers get there, but it's pretty unique.
Top cross country mountain, like Nino Schurter isn't a small person. He's pretty strong. He's not like a rower, like what you're talking about, but
yeah.
But he doesn't look like an emaciated road cyclist for sure.
There's cycling jacked, and then there's jacked, right?
Yes.
And Derek is more than cycling jacked, but he's not like, CrossFit jacked or like bodybuilder jacked.
Also, one thing to keep in mind too, with the sort of riding that Derek does, he does like it's like a lot of road or a decent amount of road. Actually, not that much road. It's a whole lot of like trail and enduro because he's also a pro was a pro downhill racer who, by the way, if you ever get a chance to ride with Derek, you totally should. I learned more following him, which Chad and I rode with him not long ago. I learned more following Derek than I have following any other rider. He has like a level of finesse that's just like next level. He's very good at that sort of thing. So with that kind of skill and everything else that he has as well, in many cases, the limiter for a road cyclist going over to mountain biking, they need to do strength training because that will enable them to descend better, right? Like it's actually a limiter that affects their descending. And with Derek, I feel like you're mentioning, Nate, he's probably on the other end of the spectrum there. And with the skill that he has, he can probably drop down really far. I don't want to say this because I'd race him at national championships. And if Derek gets really fit, I don't know how I would beat Derek ever because he is so good on a bike. But if he did that and dropped himself down, like you said, on muscle mass, that could be a good thing. So, I mean, really, that's talking about the low-hanging fruit, right, Chad? Like what you're doing and then finding ways where you can optimize.
Yeah, I mean, I seem like it, but weight loss is one of the easy gets because you don't really have to do anything. You just have to eat less. And that's uncomfortable and it's challenging in its own ways, but it doesn't mean, well, I was going to say it doesn't mean any suffering. There is a bit of suffering there, but really it can be behavioral modification. So you can just figure out small tweaks and lose that weight also incrementally over, a pretty long stretch of time. You might not even feel it. And I mean, we're talking strength to weight here, weight being one part of that equation. So the weight goes down, then that ratio improves.
And for most of us listening to this, if we're losing weight, hopefully, all of us probably feel like we have some body fat to lose. I don't think Derek has any to lose, according to the picture.
I was going to say, maybe not eating less, just like fewer bicep curls. I don't know.
Yeah. But for
instead
him,
of put down the fork, it's put down the weights.
Yeah, exactly. For him, it would probably be pretty darn unpleasant because he'd be breaking down muscle and utilizing muscle as fuel. And basically that would be how he drops some weight. So, I mean, it's unpleasant for everybody, but that's definitely a one perspective on it. Nate, were you going to say something? I don't know if I cut you off.
I just think that if he's racing enduro, he probably doesn't want to lose the upper body strength. It's probably making him faster, but man, a 5 watt per kilo enduro rider, is that very common? I don't think so.
He could,
I can't think of one.
If he was still in that mindset, he would be destroying enduro right now. Like at a very high level.
Because there's pedaling during the stage. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, there's tons of fitness. And if you can get yourself to 5 watts per kilo and then have repeatability and you're an enduro racer, watch out everybody else. Like, unless you're really bad at descending, watch out, because you will really be able to put some time on people. So I guess another way to look at this too is some people may be doing this training, like you mentioned, Nate, they may be getting in their 10 hours and kind of pushing up against the logistical limits in their life. Like, they can't really add any more because family or work would suffer. And if you're doing that, I still think there's probably, you can not even change the work you're doing, but you can actually absorb more when you are making sure you're recovering more effectively. Like, if you were, let's say, and I know that this is unrealistic, but let's say you did the same exact 6-week training block, right? And you followed that 6 weeks and you slept terribly. You got 6 hours of sleep at max, but you were less than that all the way through that 6 weeks. Then let's say that you were somehow able to have the same starting point and do that 6 weeks again. But that time you got 9 hours of sleep every night and you were able to do that. I guarantee you that you're actually going to see more improvement out of your body when you're able to recover more, even though you're doing the same work. You're actually getting more out of it.
You're nurturing the adaptive response. And that's yet another form of the low-hanging fruit I'm talking about. And maybe it isn't low-hanging, maybe he's already addressed this, but if you haven't looked at the recovery side of this equation, you may not need more volume. You may just need to improve the other side of things, which is the recovery and therefore the adaptation. And he mentions, so apparently, I'm guessing this took place on social. Some people threw some suggestions at him, and he says that others suggest the addition of recovery modalities like diaphragm, deep tissue work, hot cold therapies, and more. To which, a couple general things I'd like to say on the matter of these additional recovery modalities, but it also granted me an opportunity to talk about something that I've been trying to weave in for a long time. So going to do a little bit of a deep dive on one little thing because it shines a light on something that I don't think a lot of people have considered. First off, regarding recovery modalities, is they're often the icing on the cake. And I'm not talking about sleep and nutrition and nutrient timing and the obvious things. Those are by far icing. That is the cake. That's the recovery cake. Those are time tested and proven, but the jury's really out on so many of those other things. And even if there is some research to support them, there's probably as much to refute them. In any case, they're inconsistent. Some do work though. I'm not trying to poo-poo all these things. I mean, the compression boots, there are things, but I do want people to keep in mind that when you start to delve into those or wade into those waters, we're talking about marginal gains here, and marginal gains are for when margins matter. You save them for when you need to be concerned with the little things, when you've maximized all the obvious things, all the low-hanging fruit we're talking about right now. So kind of on that note, he mentions deep diaphragm deep tissue work. Probably, maybe, I don't know. It's one of those, the risk to reward ratio is so even that, you're not going to do any damage in the process. You might not reap a big benefit, but if there's anything there, I don't know if you've ever dug around in your diaphragm before, but if you hook your hands underneath your rib cage and start feeling just how tight that is, you should be able to really get your fingertips in there. If your diaphragm is tight, it's painful to try to even get just the first digit in there. You can also notice, and I've done this, imbalances, tighter on the right side than the left side. What's going on there? And that can be anything from hip alignment to shoulder alignment to, you're riding your bike a particular way. Maybe you need a shim. Maybe you have a left-right leg length discrepancy. Who knows? It could be a bit of insight into something that does actually matter. But I saw diaphragm and it was ding, ding, ding. Oh, now I can finally talk about something. So a few times in the past, I think I've even kind of shot down the idea that the respiratory muscles can be a limiter to endurance performance. It's like, come on, your diaphragm doesn't fatigue. If your diaphragm fatigued, you'd stop breathing, you die. It's like having your heart fatigue. So it's not realistic. Turns out, and I've known this for quite some time, but again, haven't really had the opportunity to weave it in less than obviously. Not that this isn't obvious, but
super
the respiratory. No, let's just shut up and move on. The respiratory muscles can in fact be limiting. Okay, these muscles can fatigue, and they don't fatigue in the sense that they stop working. So let's think in terms of the diaphragm, because that's what we're talking about here. It's not going to inhibit hyperventilation. I mean, if you're deep into an interval and you're huffing and puffing and those muscles are starting to cook, or your diaphragm in particular, it's not going to stop. You're going to keep on hyperventilating, but you're going to trigger something called a metaboreflex that is a response to your fatiguing diaphragm. When this happens, you get this sympathoexcitation. So your sympathetic system, you know, the fight or flight system, our exercise response system revs up. Vasoconstriction in the exercising limb starts to take place, start to close off those blood vessels that are feeding the muscle, and this reduces the blood flow to those working muscles. So, and you think about it, when your diaphragm's tired and these muscles are still asking of high demand from the diaphragm, I mean, what's the body's response? It wants to preserve homeostasis. So it's going to start to restrict blood flow. It's going to start to limit what you can do because the diaphragm effectively says so. So basically, a cooked diaphragm leads to reduced muscular capacity. You simply can't do as much. So I haven't defined it yet, but the metabolic reflex is basically when metabolic conditions in the muscles relay signals to the brain, and this influences physiologic goings on. So some metabolic change in the muscle tells the brain, we can't do this much longer. The brain says, okay, I'm going to start to shut down resources. So, and this is on the physiological side. There's also psychological effects, and this has been pretty well researched too. There's a summary of respiratory limitations on endurance, and it's not titled that, but I did provide the link back in 2008 by Dempsey and colleagues. And one of the things they did within this study was they used a mechanical ventilator, and they reduced the inspiratory muscle work by substantially, by 40 to 60%. So basically they're assisting the diaphragm, and it reduced the diaphragm fatigue and therefore reduced the rate of rise in rate of perceived exertion, what they termed limb discomfort during exercise. So it didn't feel as hard. So you tell me, can you keep on riding at a high level if you're not feeling pain, if those messages aren't reaching the brain because they're not being sent? And in this case, performance time improved by it was 14% plus or minus 4, so 10 to 18%. That's a heck of a lot. So they hung in there for that much longer because they just felt better about it. Their muscles didn't hurt as bad. They weren't barking at them. And then other studies have shown there are various ways they used various ways to reduce the work of breathing during high intensity exercise. And they prevented some percentage of exercise induced fatigue. So this isn't the only example. This has been supported elsewhere. So the nerve endings in the muscles actually depolarize when they're exposed to certain things. So whether it's coming endogenously and it's happening as a response to exercise, or they can actually inject in experimental circumstances lactic acid, arachidonic acid, potassium, all things that are released in increasing quantities depending on the intensity of exercise. Sometimes they'll even inject capsaicin, so you know the spiciness or the spicy component of red peppers. And what they find is they depolarize. So what that means is that there's nerve activity. So there's afferent or neural feedback from the muscle to the brain. And then that feedback is fed forward and leads to central regulation. The brain is now deciding to limit the muscles, what I just said. So to put it another way, peripheral change or change in the muscle provides signals to the nervous system. And this evokes a central response in the brain, whereby the brain inspires peripheral muscle fatigue. So it's like feed forward, feedback, feed forward, feedback. I mean, it's this constant relationship, which is interesting because we're always talking about, you know, is fatigue in the brain? Is fatigue in the muscle? Is it a combination of the two? Honestly, I'm not sure it matters. And as Dempsey points out in this study, the real mystery is what are the things that trigger these muscle limitations? Let's find out what those are. Who cares whether we're feed forwarding, feeding back? It doesn't matter. Let's figure out what those are. Let's address those. Let's figure out how to train those limitations. And then in terms of the diaphragm itself, it fatigues in its own way, and it elicits this metabolic reflex. And therefore, poorly conditioned respiratory muscles can, in fact, limit our endurance performance. And I know the obvious question then is going to be, well, how do I train these muscles? And quite honestly, learn to use them. I mean, you don't need to go out and buy these fancy gizmos. I mean, that may be something you eventually need to do because you want to condition them further. You figured out that is, in fact, a limitation on your performance. But in the most case, people don't breathe well. And this is why without so many of the workouts, I push the whole belly breathing thing. And it's not like something I picked up in Pilates, though that is where I initially learned it. It's because I've recognized that the breathing muscles need to do the breathing work. We restrict it too much when we don't understand how to effectively breathe. So first and foremost, learn how to use your diaphragm.
This is an interesting point because if you are training regularly, chances are you're using your breathing muscles, but there's probably room for you to improve it. If you're a sedentary individual, you probably have a whole lot of room to improve it, right? But if you're training and you're following that sort of stuff and you follow Chad's workout text, you're going to be in a good place. Nate, you're smiling. I don't know if you want to chime in with something.
I was going to change the subject slightly, but go back on Derek. So
please.
So if
Please do.
Okay.
Let's go back.
Derek, I have also been wanting to weave this in. It's been on the dock for a while, but there's another way for Derek to lose weight.
Oh
And
boy.
before I
Superb
was doing
segue.
a race, and I thought, so here's what Keegan Swenson, who is racing right now, and I saw somebody already put one message in the chat. Stop it, please.
Do not
don't
that,
do anything.
please.
I know.
It's cruel.
You get banned from TrainerRoad for life. Just kidding. So what Keegan is all about is doing a low fiber diet leading up to the really big races, or during a stage race doing a low fiber diet. Because the thinking is, while you have a high fiber diet, there is waste that gets put in your intestinal tract that just sits there and then actually gains weight. And Keegan, he's a pretty small guy. He can lose 2 to 3 pounds by doing a low fiber diet leading up to his race. Okay, that makes sense so far.
Mhm.
So what I thought is, well, why not take a laxative to just have the 5 fiber diet and then get everything out, right? Because that's what you want to do, is you're trying to empty your intestinal tract so that you have less weight for the big race. So I sent my wife, and she went to CVS and brought home a whole bunch of laxatives. And the one that I tried was called Dulcolax. And you can go from 1 to 3 tablets. You take it at night, and in the morning, you're supposed to be good. So I thought, well, I better start at 2. And so I took 2, and they work 100%. But what happens, I actually lost 4 pounds within like 2 hours. It is crazy. They worked, but it had like this systemic feeling over my body where I worked out, and the workout was so hard, like it was not worth it. And I almost felt like slightly hungover with those kind of pills. I was like shaky, and I felt weak. So I do not recommend it, but it does work. I mean, it gets Derek halfway to his 5 watts per kilo. So what I'm thinking of now, and Amber, I want your feedback if this happened in the pros. So you can't do systemic. So there's two other ways you could do it. You could do Miralax, which is like kind of like this synthetic thing that you drink, and it makes sure stuff moves through, or a suppository. Because I don't think a suppository is systemic. I'm not really sure on that though. And I would think that if you're in a big race, or what's the colon cleanse where they like hook a tube up and they like, what's that called? And they shoot everything out. No one knows.
Enema?
Yeah, you can do it. You can go to like a place though, and they'll like really clean out your intestinal tract pretty far. I can't believe that that's not a thing more in cycling, because you can think of how much we pay to get a pound off our bike, right?
Yeah.
And if you could get 4 pounds off your bike, and you just had to go and pay a couple $100 maybe or less to go do that. Anyways, I don't recommend taking laxatives before a race. That's pretty much the point of that. Amber, did you ever hear of anyone doing a suppository or anything like that to like lose weight before a big stage?
No, I didn't. I mean, hydration, electrolyte balance, those are all things that are really, really important. So
Gut
that's
health.
just not something that you're going to want to mess with, especially that close to a race. I'm not aware of anyone doing that. It's not to say that nobody does it, but it really doesn't sound like a very good idea.
That's why I think a suppository might work.
It's a nice way to put it.
Somebody should try it. And because I think
Nate,
before,
you seem like a great candidate for it.
well, I mean,
Give it a
before
shot
that
and let us know.
2-hour climb that I did, that would have been nice to be like 2 pounds, 3 pounds lighter, right?
Sure.
So,
Everyone
anyways.
needs water.
Oh, you can still drink water, Chad.
And that has to be tremendously dehydrating. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the
Nate's
suppository is.
thinking.
Or if you couldn't just hydrate more by drinking a little bit more water.
Yeah.
Anyways, Derek, that's another option that you have on the table.
Before we leave this question though, I would like to just pause and take a moment, because Derek said that he didn't miss a single workout for an entire year. And I don't want to gloss over that, because the fact that he's a dad, he has a family, he's running his own business, and he's training, and he managed to have that level of consistency, that's hard to do. I mean, that's hard for anybody. So I just want to take a moment and say, you're doing something right. And probably to attain that level of consistency, you're having to do a whole lot of things right. Like you're getting adequate recovery. You have a really good support system. You're managing the logistics and practicalities of your life well. I mean, what it takes to have all of those things converge and result in that kind of consistency that's really hard to do. So part of me wants to say, like, you're doing a lot of things really, really right, and you're getting lots of gain. So I'm not sure I would really mess with this equation too much until, like Chad said at the very beginning, you clearly have a plateau or something is clearly going wrong. Because from where I stand right now, it doesn't really seem like anything's going wrong with what you're doing.
Very well wrapped up, Amber. Very well said.
Perfectly. And we haven't outright answered it. His question was, do you think I can reach it? Absolutely. You're so close. I mean, you're knocking on the door, you're 0.4 grams per kilo away from it. And like Amber just pointed to, you're doing so many things right. So just keep on keeping on.
This is like, you come home with 99% on a test and you're like, but what about that 1%?
Well, definitely don't do whatever got you to 99. Throw that out the window.
Right. And just keep in mind, I mean,
the
rate of
yeah, exactly.
just throw everything out the door.
Low cadence intervals all day. That's what I get.
The rate of progress that you're making may change and it may fluctuate. So you may not see the same kind of gains at the same rate. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get to where you want to go maintaining this level of consistency. And my best guess is that, like, maintaining this consistency will be the main thing that gets you to where you want to go, as opposed to making little marginal gain tweaks here and there.
There's nothing that is more impactful in a person's performance than consistency, at least from our perspective. That thing in terms of, like, that has greater impact. If you're more consistent, you will see more improvement. That's just how it goes. So Derek, you've actually found the holy grail, which is discipline. It's not like you found it, or it's just discipline, and you have your priorities straight with that. So if you can hold on to that, you'll be good.